So holy shit, you guys are really letting this series pop off. I'm writing this script a couple days after the Wave 6 video went up, and that one got nearly 1,000 views within the last day alone. I can't emphasize enough how much I appreciate you guys watching this series. I'm having a blast making it, and I hope that's coming through to y'all in the final products. That aside, today we're here to talk about Wave 4 of the Booster Course Pass. Wave 4 had a lot riding on it at the time. For one, it was coming fresh off the heels of Wave 3, and that's not even an exaggeration. This one dropped right at about 3 months after Wave 3, by far the shortest gap between any wave of the pass. Not only that, but Wave 4 was the start of the second year of the Booster Course Pass, so it had to set the stage for what was to come. Even from a leaks perspective, there were multiple major things happening here. For one, we knew this was most likely going to be our first wave with a GameCube track. We knew Waluigi Stadium was pushed out of Wave 3, but nobody was sure when it would actually make its debut. We also knew there were 2 remaining GBA tracks and 1 DS track. The Wave 5 GBA track had already been data mined to be Sunset Wilds, but the slot in Wave 4 was still unknown. The Wave 4 DS slot was also unknown at the time, so as you would expect, there were many debates as to what the DS and GBA tracks were going to be in this wave. The DS track was especially elusive. There were definitely dissenting theories on what the GBA track would be, but things were straight up heated when it came to the DS track debates. You could divide most of the fanbase up between Airship Fortress, Delfino Square, and the couple people in the back of the room saying Mario Circuit since it was data mined for tour. Not only that, but because of leaks, we knew this was about to be the first of 2 waves with 3 Mario Kart Tour city tracks instead of the usual 2. And considering the city tracks tend to fall behind the other tracks in each wave, we knew some heavy lifting had to be done one way or another. This would have to entail more interesting city tracks and or heavier hitters on the retro side of things. The good thing is we had gotten pretty much all of the mid-city tracks out of the way at this point, so it was only up after Wave 3 no matter what. Not to mention we had 2 beacons of hope going in. A Wii track, which are pretty much always guaranteed to be fan favorites, and a non-city tour nitro that may or may not end up launching in Wave 4 first. So let's get into it. You guys know the drill by now. To start off, we have the city tracks. This time around, we have all 3 city tracks introduced into tour in 2022, being Amsterdam Drift, Bangkok Rush, and Singapore Speedway. Now, this is a pretty huge jump. The first year of the pass only used city tracks from 2019 and 2021. The 2019 ones are all very basic, while the 2021 ones were a little more interesting, though still relatively flat, all things considered. 2020 city tracks are a bit of an outlier and feel like a midpoint between the 2021 and 2022 cities, which is likely why they were saved for the back half of the pass. As for the 2022 city tracks themselves, this is when the designs of these courses drastically jumped. Between these 3 cities, there's a higher variety in landscape, significantly more verticality, and generally more dynamic layouts. I think the best way I can put it is that the 2019 city tracks feel like race tracks that happen to be themed around certain cities. The 2022 city tracks feel like they took these cities and designed a race course around them, if that makes any sense. To start off, we have Amsterdam Drift. This one was really fun for me to see come to the pass because while I did play tour at launch and sporadically came back here and there, I didn't really start consistently playing until right around when the Booster Course Pass was first revealed, since that was also when they started really going all out with adding new courses pretty much every tour from that point on. Amsterdam was the first new city track to come out after I got back in, so it was really cool seeing it be brought into both games at different points. That aside though, I will admit Amsterdam isn't exactly my favorite city. I'm not even really sure what it is exactly, but something about it just doesn't quite do it for me. It has one of the weaker music tracks among the entire city lineup, and while I do like the variety in the track design, I just find myself rarely wanting to pick it. Now that isn't to say it's bad, far from it actually. Amsterdam is a lot like Los Angeles, where each of the 3 laps feels completely distinct from one another. Lap 1 has you driving through some farmland, Lap 2 takes you through the canals of the city, and Lap 3 brings you to a flower garden. There's definitely some good variety here, even though some aspects are a bit controversial. That's because a lot of people are not huge fans of Lap 2, which I can understand. It's definitely unique in being pretty much the only extended underwater section in any city track, but also it's an underwater section, which is most people's least favorite mode of driving in the game. Admittedly, it also isn't the most scenic lap, since all there really is to look at underwater here is the brick and concrete walls surrounding you. Overall though, I at least appreciate Amsterdam for bringing some much needed variety with it. I'll take a one-off extended underwater section over more of just driving on city roads any day. Speaking of city roads, let's talk about Bangkok Rush. Now, I actually don't mean that as a dig this time, because Bangkok does a lot to stand out too. For one, it's the only city track in the past to be set at sunset, which already makes it visually stand out. Notice how I qualified that statement, since Los Angeles was also during a sunset and tour. Also, while there is a lot of driving on streets here, there is a lot more going on to make Bangkok stand out. There's a river with boats you can trick off of, a railroad market, and a parking garage that shoots you out on top of some market tents. Even the street sections feel varied. There's one bit where you're on a freeway and you can take an alternate path above the main one, as well as some turns where you can make shroomless corner cuts between these little poles. Speaking of shortcuts, I'm quite a fan of this one you can take after gliding through the giant swing. This one feels especially unique since it's inaccessible if you land early, but it still requires a shroom. I love seeing them come up with new ways to make shortcuts like this, and I want to see more like it in the future. It adds some extra depth to the gliding section outside of just kind of gliding for the spectacle of it. The only real gripe I have with this track was the removal of the ink piranha plants. I know it's a completely new enemy to this game, but considering some of the other tracks we have in this wave alone, there isn't much of an excuse. Having an actual hazard on the main route of the freeway section gave a legitimate reason to use the slower path above, since that one didn't have any hazards to avoid. Plus, again, it's a unique enemy to avoid, which I always think is a plus that can justify a track's inclusion. One last thing to note is that this is the first city track to be swapped around in the past. Originally, Los Angeles was supposed to end the Boomerang Cup and Bangkok was set to start the Cherry Cup, but to be honest, I think Los Angeles was more fitting for a summer wave anyway. Plus, I like Bangkok being here since it was the only 2022 city track that originally was missing from Wave 4. Notice though that this track was moved to the start of the Boomerang Cup, as opposed to the end of it. That's because the city track that originally started this cup is now at the end, and I can definitely see why. I think it's worth noting that Singapore Speedway is the only city track in the entire pass whose music was used in the trailer for its wave. I think this is for 2 reasons. First of all, Singapore just straight up has a banger of a music track. Like, it's easily in my top 5 as city tracks go. And that's saying something because tours tracks all generally have amazing music. The biggest reason though is that Singapore is one of the biggest fan favorite city tracks. Being the first city track of 2022, it definitely set a very high standard for the final batches of tour city tracks. The funny thing though is I actually wasn't all that huge on Singapore within tour. Singapore 1, which is the route lap 1 takes here, just felt too short and basic. Singapore 2 and 3 both were fine enough, but still didn't quite do it for me. Though it was cool having a music variant for the Chinatown portion of 3. I did have hope though. The 3 routes here were fairly weak individually, but I definitely saw the vision and had a feeling that all 3 working in tandem with one another was going to make for something special. I was absolutely proven right here, and I think the big shakeup with the track ordering for the later waves of the past worked in Waves 4 favor immensely, because I cannot think of any other city that would have been a better note to end this wave on. Like, looking back, the original plan of Singapore starting the Boomerang Cup and Los Angeles ending it would have been kind of a letdown compared to what we ended up getting. Now, as for the track itself, one thing I've commonly heard is that this track is actually fairly close to this area of Singapore in real life. With that being the case, I think those limitations really worked in its favor, because there's so much creativity that went into this track. Singapore Speedway is mostly built around the Marina Bay Sands and the area surrounding it. Lap 1 shoots you to the top where you drive across the infinity pools and glide back down. Lap 2 has you go through it, and Lap 3 takes you directly in front of it. Now, the creativity didn't just stop in Tour, because in bringing Singapore into 8, they took some very creative liberties with the overall routing. Like I said, Lap 1 is exactly the same as Singapore 1 in Tour. Lap 2 takes you through the Chinatown portion of 3, and then loops around from there to the start of Singapore 2, where lap, or technically section 3 of the race starts. From here you complete the bulk of Singapore 2, but turn to the Singapore 3 route at the end instead of turning towards the finish line. From here, Singapore 3 plays out as normal. I will admit, it does make for a bit of a lopsided race. Laps 1 and especially 2 are very short compared to 3, which has to combine 2 entire routes from Tour. That said, lap 3 is one of the best laps in the entire series, and with it being the final lap of the race, it definitely fits. I also generally love the idea of a hybrid track like this where it's simultaneously lap and section based. I'm happy we got to see that one more time in a future city track. Now, let's move on to the retros. Like I said, this wave was kind of the last big question mark for the pass, since most of the remaining track slots were either already known, or could fairly easily be assumed between the prefix leak and the context of when the wave is dropping. A lot was riding on the GBA and DS slots especially, since we basically knew definitively that this was the last chance for tracks from these games. The GBA slot was actually a fairly easy pick to make. The remaining GBA tracks in Tour at the time were Cheap Cheap Island, Riverside Park, and the first 3 Bowser's Castles. We knew from data mines that there were at least a few more to come, but generally the options we knew of specifically had issues with them. Yoshi Desert, for instance, feels a little too similar to Sunset Wilds, and while it's not impossible for them to both be in the past, having them in neighboring waves feels a bit too much. Luigi Circuit was also data mined, but considering we already had GBA Mario Circuit in 8 since the original launch, it felt very unlikely that we would get 2 circuits from the same game when they were just better options in general. We also knew that either Bowser's Castle 4 or Broken Pier was coming to Tour, but considering Boo Lake, the latter felt unlikely. Bowser's Castle 4 was a decent possibility though. Between Cheap Cheap Island, Riverside Park, and one of the Bowser's Castles, it definitely felt like a toss-up, and to be honest, I don't think anyone really cared much about this slot considering none of the options were really all that popular to begin with. Personally, I was rooting for Riverside Park since my last non-confirmed GBA pick I wanted was Lakeside Park. At the time, it kind of felt like it was a one or another kind of situation within Tour itself, so I was very happy to even see Riverside have a chance of making the DLC. Of course, we did end up getting Lakeside in Tour a little bit after Wave 5 dropped, and now we're stuck only being able to play that version of it for 2 weeks every year. Yippee. On the bright side, Riverside did indeed end up making the cut. Now listen, I know Riverside Park is a very simple track. I was thinking that even when I was rooting for it to come to 8. Not to mention, the Tour version didn't really have any hazards. It's just kind of road and nothing else. That's where 8 Deluxe comes in though. You know how I talked about my disappointment with the ink piranha plants being cut from Bangkok? This track is part of the reason. Riverside Park and 8 Deluxe adds in Patuis that walk around a majority of the track. For one, this is a brand new enemy to the Mario Kart series, which is already sick as hell. But for another, they have a completely unique function. They carry items above them, so when you hit them, they drop whatever they were blowing. This leaves you with either a mushroom to take or a banana to leave for someone else to slip on. Did I mention this is a completely new enemy? Like, not a single track in Tour even has them. They were made specifically for 8 Deluxe, which is honestly really odd considering the Booster Course Pass overall has more or less been a way of preserving Tour content and not really making much new stuff outside of that. Regardless, the effort is very much appreciated, and the Patuis add that last little something to make Riverside Park feel complete. Moving on, we now have to discuss Wave 4's DS track. For context, at the time, the only remaining DS tracks in Tour were Luigi's Mansion, DK Pass, and of course, Airship Fortress. Mario Circuit was also data mined, but nothing else beyond that. The obvious heavy hitter here is Airship Fortress. It's a huge fan favorite course, and like Waluigi Pinball, it got a really noticeable visual overhaul when coming to tour. Among the other options, Luigi's Mansion feels like it would have been in an earlier wave if it was going to happen, and DK Pass just never truly felt like it was in the running anyway, especially with a similar track being set for this wave that we'll get to later. So when you take Airship Fortress and Mario Circuit, there's a pretty clear winner here when you take the fans into consideration, right? Now I want to ask two things. First, how does Nintendo like to function? Second, why would I be building this up so much if we got the obvious pick? Now look, I don't want to be one of those people that comes off as salty because DS Mario Circuit made it in. Would I have preferred Airship Fortress? Of course. Am I mad that it didn't make it in? Not at all. The way I see it is no matter what, we still have Airship Fortress in both DS and 7 until it gets brought to a home console entry. All things considered, not all tracks can say that. While I would have loved to see the tour version of Airship Fortress brought in here, I think Mario Circuit is more than justified as a pick. For one, Airship Fortress was a retro of Mario Kart 7. On the other hand, DS Mario Circuit has never returned in a console Mario Kart game until now. Plus, because it originated as Star Cup as opposed to the usual Flower Cup, this Mario Circuit in particular has a bit more of a unique layout compared to its counterparts. So if we were going to get any 3D Mario Circuit in the DLC, DS was definitely one of the best options. As for how it was adapted here, I think they actually did a really great job working what they had and expanding on it. This mostly comes down to the aesthetics. The original version looked fine, but it didn't stand out at all among all the other circuit tracks in the series. Hell, I remember before I really got into Mario Kart like I am today, my memories of this and the DS remake of Yoshi Circuit just kinda blended together. In the remake though, the stage received a major glow up and is now more colorful and vibrant than ever. Heck, there were even some little tweaks to the layout, in that the double hairpin turn at the end is now on a slope as opposed to being completely flat in the original. I can't mention changes to this track though without mentioning the section after you go through the pipe, which has now been turned into a forest section with a completely different atmosphere from the rest of the track. Couple that with the wiggler that wakes up and walks on this part of the track on lap 3, on 150cc and below at least, and you get a little dash of much appreciated flavor that Mario circuits tend to not usually have. Oh yeah, the fire piranha plants are back and fully functional like in the original. Why was this not possible in Bangkok? They're basically the same enemy, come on now. The next two retros are much more universally well received, and both were definitely among the biggest highlights of this wave, starting with you know how in my Wave 5 video I said Koopa Cape was my favorite Wii track? DK Summit is my second. For a long time, I felt like I was kind of in a minority when I said that, since it felt like most people put their attention on other Wii tracks like Coconut Mall and Toad's Factory. Needless to say, it made me very happy to not only see this come to the BCP, but also see how hyped the rest of the fanbase was about its inclusion. While I would never say the track is underrated, because I don't think that has ever been true, I'm really glad it was properly given the spotlight it deserved. The track plays amazingly too. Yes, I do have to address there's a bit of jankiness with the half pipes. That doesn't really detract from my personal enjoyment though. Heck, it almost adds a risk-reward factor for attempting to do the corner cut at the very end, since there's now a major risk that you could completely screw yourself over. Of course, I don't think this was intended, and I completely understand if others are annoyed by this. To be honest, I think a lot of it has to do with half pipes being such a late addition to 8 Deluxe, and it kinda just is what it is at that point in my eyes. Outside of that, this track is a blast. Going flying when you hit the half pipes just right on some of the slopes will never not be fun as hell, and I'm super happy to see yet another ultra shortcut from Wii making its return here. DK Summit more than earns its slot in the past, and I'm truly ecstatic that it's here. I was also excited about another track that was very highly anticipated, for more reasons than one. And holy shit, they definitely made it worth the wait. After initially being planned for Wave 3, Waluigi Stadium finally made its way into the Booster Course Pass one wave later. As it would have originally been, it is the first GameCube track in the pass. It's honestly nuts to me that we had to wait almost a year before a single GameCube track showed up, but considering the quality of the 3 we got in the end, I don't blame them for letting them have a little extra time to cook. Waluigi Stadium is easily the best example of this. For one, it looks completely different from how it does in Tour. You can tell they really cooked with the textures this time to the point where it feels like a base game track. The track largely plays the same to its previous counterparts. The half pipes from Wii are all retained, and pretty much all of the shortcuts are where they've always been. The biggest changes start at the main half pipe section of the track. It is absolutely not unusual for them to change up the positioning of the Mecha Piranha plants in each iteration, but this version has the most noticeable change, with the first two being right next to each other, angled diagonally up in the air. I'm mixed on this change. On one hand, it does aesthetically look cool. On the other, it simplifies this section of the track a little bit, since now there's only really 2 walls you have to go around, only one of which is actually moving in a way that can actually disrupt a potential path. In a sense though, this isn't too big of a deal, as the half pipes that were added in Wii encourage you to skip the middle entirely anyway. I also think there's some good reasoning for the way this is the way it is. The way it's set up, you only really have to deal with 1 if you keep to the left, and 2 if you keep to the right. If you go down the middle, you have a relatively small gap to get through, as the pipes take up a large chunk of both sides of the track. Now, you would think this is a weird choice, since most of the time you would want to hang to the left to make a closer turn, right? That's because the right side here has the first of 2 instances of one of the coolest uses of half pipes in this series so far, as if you jump off the very last bit of that half pipe, you will land on a brand new path that's only intended to be accessible through them. In this case, there's an extra set of item boxes as a reward for landing up here. There's a second instance of this at the very end where you can take a more streamlined final turn that lets you glide over the final jump. While these paths aren't necessarily faster, it's a great way to break up the crowd of a race and give the track a new flavor that wasn't even present in the Tour version. I love that they were able to bring back half pipes after so long and are finding new ways to innovate with them, and I hope we continue to see that in future games. The final track we have to cover is the main headliner for Wave 4. Like Waves 2 and 5, the non-city tour nitro of this wave was actually released as a new track for the pass first. Similar to the other 2, this one was heavily rumored for months leading up to Wave 4. With Wave 2, we knew there was going to be an ice cream track because of the banner leak. With Wave 5, we knew there would be a bathroom track because of assets found in Tour. And with this wave, we had another track that was pretty much given away by Tour data mines. I'd even argue more so than the bathroom track was. In the files of Tour, assets popped up for a Mob YI track, the YI being the significant part. Some of these assets included a new Shy Guy variant and a goal ring. Sound familiar? So yeah, it's pretty easy to guess that YI stands for Yoshi's Island. Well, it ended up being Yoshi Island in the files, but still. This fueled my own personal theory as to when Wave 4 would drop. As I said in the Wave 3 video, the wave releases tended to coincide with that wave's non-city Nitro's return or release to Tour, pretty much always being the week before. Another trend we have always had with Tour is that there's always a Yoshi Tour during whatever Tour slot coincides with Easter each year. Based on all of this, it made complete sense to me that they would add the Yoshi's Island Nitro to Tour during the Yoshi Tour, which would pin Wave 4 somewhere around mid to late March. Sure enough, the February Nintendo Direct rolled around, giving us our first look at the track and confirming it would indeed be released in the Booster Course Pass first. Given the wave came out a lot earlier than expected, being towards the beginning of March, but the logic still more or less tracked. The track itself is phenomenal, keeping up with the previous crossover tracks to act as a love letter to the original game. All of the major world themes are represented one way or another, there are brand new enemies to avoid from the original game, and the sound design is completely on point, even down to new starting grid and finished jingles. And of course, the music is a remix of the iconic athletic theme from the original game. I also love Poochie at the starting line. They may not have made him playable here, but they at least incorporated his tour racer model in some way. They even keep up with incorporating a mechanic from the original games like crossover tracks tend to do, this time with a winged cloud floating around the final gliding section. If you fly through it, which is surprisingly tough to do, a shorter path opens up that can give you a major boost above everyone else. Even if the track layout itself is on the simpler side, Yoshi's Island is easily one of the biggest standouts of the Booster Course Pass just from memorability alone. I was excited for it when it was data mined, and it definitely lived up to those expectations. I'm so glad Yoshi finally got a new track that wasn't mid. As for the update itself, there wasn't a ton of additional stuff content-wise compared to most other waves. We didn't get any new modes or track revisions this time like we did with waves 2 or 3. This was a game-changing update though, because Nintendo finally did what everyone was begging for them to do. We finally got new characters ported from Tour. In this case, it was Birdo, with all of the accompanying color variations. Not the craziest addition, but definitely a more than welcome one. This was huge. Tour infamously has one of the biggest, most robust Mario Kart character rosters, even ignoring all of the costume variants. Pretty much all of the non-crossover Mario Kart 8 roster was there, as well as not only returning characters people were begging for like Petey Piranha, Diddy Kong, and Funky Kong, but also awesome new additions to the series like Nabbit, Kamek, and King Babam. Before the update actually dropped, it was hard to say how many characters we needed to expect. Only Birdo was included in Wave 4, so it was reasonable to assume it could be a one per wave kind of deal. That is until the update dropped with 5 question marks below Birdo on the character select, meaning we had at least 5 more characters on the way. It was super exciting because this felt like our chance to finally round out the Mario Kart 8 character roster and give us the characters that always felt like glaring exclusions. This is especially true since the characters were being pulled from Tour, which heavily limited the choices on the table to a very solid list. Birdo was definitely a promising start. That's about it for Wave 4 though. This was a great start to the second half of the Booster Course Pass, and it set up some major exciting things to come for the last 2 waves. Next time though, we end this retrospective series, somewhat appropriately, with the wave that started it all. Until then, bye! Oh, wait. When was Wave 1 released again? Oh, fuck.